Hi, my name is Gemma, and I'm 27 years old. Sometimes, when I say it out loud, I think these words sound so confident, as if someone knows where they're going and why, but at the time, when it all happened, I was more of a girl than a woman, confused, in love, trying to be a good daughter and not let my parents down. I worked as a senior manager in the family company that my mother, Giovanna, and father, Bernardo, had built from literally nothing, a small shop, endless sleepless nights, risks that not everyone would have dared to take. I loved working with them, even if it was sometimes difficult to prove that I wasn't just the boss's daughter but a person capable of my own things. Ever since I graduated from college, I'd lived their life, meetings, phone calls, endless spreadsheets, and clients to please. My whole life revolved around their business, and I considered it natural. And then Gaspar Russo came along. We met at a charity event, and from the very first moment, he struck me as a surprisingly polite person, attentive to every detail. He opened doors for me, pulled out my chair, asked how my day was, and most importantly, he remembered things I said casually, tiny details no one else noticed. I thought then that this was love. We were together for almost a year, and when he proposed, I didn't hesitate for a second. Gaspar's family lived in a small town on the outskirts of the state. They had little money. His father worked in a factory, and his mother, as I learned, was unemployed. When I first arrived at their home, I was greeted with forced smiles and sharp remarks. They interrupted each other, made awkward jokes, and spoke loudly, as if afraid no one would hear them, and all the time, I caught myself thinking they were acting as if they were doing me a favor by letting me be around their son. I saw something unpleasant about it, but I stubbornly pushed away my doubts, assuring myself that Gaspar was different, that he wasn't like them. My parents didn't hide their anxiety. My father once asked if I was sure this man was really the one for me. My mother, always gentler, simply said it would be nice to give myself more time to get to know him better, but I, blinded by my feelings and pride, brushed it off. I literally begged them to believe in our union, convincing them that Gaspar was the one for me, and they, though hesitant, agreed. We set a wedding date for 4 months later. My parents wanted my new life to begin beautifully. Dad bought us a house in the Denver suburbs, a cozy, detached house with a small, green courtyard, 3 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. He personally oversaw the renovation for months, choosing tiles, consulting with the builders, debating the color of the facade. He invested not only money, tens of thousands of dollars, but also his heart. The new floor gleamed. The kitchen smelled fresh and woody. Everything was perfect. On the day the work was finished, the whole family drove out to see the finished product. I couldn't sit still in the car with excitement. After all, this was supposed to be my home, mine and Gaspar's. But when we pulled up, I immediately noticed Gaspar's familiar car in the driveway, along with 2 others, Russo's parents. This surprised me, but I thought maybe he wanted a surprise. We approached the house, and suddenly heard a loud, harsh, disgruntled voice. "Those neighbors are too close. We need to build a fence. I don't like being stared at." It was Mrs. Russo. I felt Mom and Dad exchange glances. I saw that wary expression in them that made me uneasy. When we entered, I literally froze. Gaspar, his mother, and father were standing in the living room. They were walking through the house as if it were their own, not even noticing our arrival. No one said hello or glanced in our direction. Mrs. Russo was in the master bedroom at the time, lying on the bed in her dirty slippers, the snow-white blanket already showing traces of dirt. Her husband stood by the window smoking a cigarette, and I saw him stub out his cigarette right on the new bedside table, a charred mark immediately left on the wood. "What are you doing?" I blurted out. My voice was higher than I intended. Mrs. Russo stood up and chuckled. "Oh, Gemma, we were just looking around the house," she said with that lazy, slightly mocking tone that immediately made me cringe. Without my permission, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Mr. Russo turned and gave me a look full of superiority. "This will be our son's house. We have a right to see it." Papa spoke first. I could feel his shoulders tense. "This house was a gift to my daughter." Mrs. Russo waved her hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Well, she's marrying Gaspard, so this is his house too." Without waiting for an answer, she sank back onto the bed, stretched out, and said, lazily gesturing toward the ceiling, "We'll take this bedroom, it's the biggest one." "That won't happen," I said so quietly and firmly that a strange silence fell over the room for a moment, as if everyone had been expecting me to show weakness, but I steeled my bewildered heart and spoke words that would never be returned. Mr. Russo, ignoring me, walked past and disappeared into the hallway. Then he opened the guest room door and peered inside. His voice laced with that smug confidence that immediately struck me as alien and cutting. "This option is perfect for Cristiano." "Who is Cristiano?" Mom asked, and her voice didn't sound curious, but simply like she needed to understand what other claims were being made on our property. "Our grandson," Mr. Russo said evenly and with a hint of pride, "is Gaspard's nephew." Then came a barrage of orders that made my stomach clench. "Gaspard, call your brother Luigi right now and tell him to break the lease and move here with BT and the baby." Gaspard silently pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling just slightly, and in that trembling, I tried to decipher who he really was. "Wait," I blurted out, unable to pretend any longer, "what are you talking about?" Mr. Russo turned to me as if I were just an annoying fly. "Luigi and his wife need a stable place to live," he said. "Cristiano will be starting school soon. This house would be perfect for them. This is my house," he added silently, as if reminding those around him of some sacred right. "I said it would be in Luigi's name," he continued speaking, seemingly oblivious to my growing panic. "For the sake of Cristiano's future. You and Gaspar can come back here later, when you have children, but for now, the two of you can rent an apartment somewhere." These words fell on me like a cold stone, because this house was a gift from my parents, because it was filled with not only money, but also hopes, love, and that selfless faith in a happy beginning that only mothers give when they prepare a child for their own destiny. Mr. Russo's face flushed with a sense of power, and he declared that the house belongs to my son, which means it belongs to us, and that I need to learn to respect my future father-in-law. Mrs. Russo sat lazily and said words that drowned my sorrow. "And as our future daughter-in-law, you must take care of our needs. You should hire a maid to clean everything for us once we move in." Mama stepped forward, her voice carrying the quiet yet relentless firmness I'd learned from her. "If you want a home and someone to care for you, you'll have to pay for it yourself." Mrs. Russo's jaw dropped, as if the insult had been an unexpected blow. "How dare you treat us like beggars?" she spat, her words laced with hurt and irritation. "Don't talk to my mother like that," I said, unable to remain silent any longer, even though my heart was pounding like it was about to burst out of my chest. At that moment, Gaspar grabbed my wrist tightly, his hand feeling like a trap. "Matt just apologized to my parents," he said with a kind of cold satisfaction, and I felt a flash of blindness in his eyes, a desire for approval. I tried to break free, but he squeezed even tighter, and I realized I could never be with this man if he was willing to submit to their ridicule. Mr. Russo, pointing at my parents, spoke with such righteous indignation, as if passing judgment. "This is what happens when you raise your daughter wrong. Don't worry, Gaspar will teach her how to behave after marriage." Then he looked at his son and nodded, as if handing over some deadly manuscript. "A woman needs to be beaten sometimes, only then will she learn to obey." Gaspar nodded in response, and my eyes darkened with both horror and shame, because I didn't expect the man I loved and to whom I was going to entrust my future to be capable of accepting such a sentence and looking at me with approval. I suddenly felt cold, and, mustering the last of my strength, I pulled my hand away, free but trembling. "I won't marry him," I said, turning first to my parents, because I looked to them for approval and protection. Then I looked straight at Gaspar and said the words that tore me apart inside, but which I had to say out loud. "We're from different worlds. This will never work. Take your parents and get out of my house." Mrs. Russo jumped out of bed, and her voice was threatening. "If you call off this wedding, my son will never take you back." "Okay," I replied quietly, hurt by my own resolve, and at that moment Mr. Russo stepped closer, his face contorted with contempt, and he uttered the final insult, which seemed to have been prepared in advance. "You are pathetic. You are an ugly girl that no man wants. You will be left alone." Before I could figure out what to do, my father's fist slammed into Mr. Russo's face, and in that silent, tense room the sound of the impact was deafening. The man fell backwards, hitting the floor. Mrs. Russo screamed, "He's beating my husband," and my father, his eyes full of fury and protective love, said, "Say one more word and you will not leave this house on your own 2 feet, then turned to Gaspard and punched him in the face. and that was for allowing them to insult my daughter. My father, no longer able to contain his anger or contempt, grabbed Mr. Russo by the collar of his shirt and yanked him up from the floor, barely managing to catch his breath. His voice was low and muffled, but it rang with steel. "Even if Gemma wanted to marry your son and join your family, I would never allow it. My daughter is smart, beautiful, strong, and capable. She's too good for your son," he said, each word seeming to pierce the air. Then, with effort but without hesitation, he threw Mr. Russo toward the door, as if he were throwing out of our house not just a man, but everything dirty, humiliating, and false they had brought here. Mr. Russo staggered to his feet and, without looking back, ran out of the house, leaving his wife and son behind. Mrs. Russo, flushed with rage, grabbed Gaspard by the arm and almost forcibly dragged him toward the exit, screaming at the top of her lungs, "You'll regret this, you'll beg us to come back." Her voice rang hysterically, but I no longer heard the threats, only the dull thump of my heart, pounding somewhere beneath my chest, painfully and heavily. When the door slammed behind them, the house grew quiet, and I suddenly felt tears streaming down my cheeks, slowly at first, then more intensely, and the words burst from my lips, "You were right about him, you both were right." Mom came to me, hugged me, held me close, and her hands smelled of the same thing, home, warmth, salvation. "It's okay, darling," she said quietly, "it all ended the way it was supposed to." Dad stood next to me, looking at us, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him smile, tiredly, but with relief. Several weeks had passed since the day I broke off my engagement. I tried not to think, not to remember, simply immersed myself in work, as if I could drown in it and no longer feel anything. I arrived at the office early, left late, sorted through papers, held meetings, prepared reports, and only sometimes, on the quietest evenings, when the lights went out outside, I caught myself still waiting for the phone to ring and his name to appear on the screen, but it didn't. I was beginning to think it was all just a bad dream, gradually fading from my memory, when one day, opening my email, I saw a letter from Gaspar. At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, because the letter had an attached file, a neatly formatted spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and notes. I opened it, and my heart went cold. The spreadsheet was a detailed list of every expense he claimed he'd paid for during our relationship. Starbucks coffee on March 15, $14.50, flowers on Valentine's Day, $35, Uber ride on April 3, $18, dinner at an Italian restaurant on May 20, $67. It went on line after line, and at the end, he summed it up. The grand total was $3,247.82. And underneath the spreadsheet, a short message: "You owe me this money, pay by next Friday, or I'll come to your office." I sat there for a long time, incredulous. I thought it was some kind of cruel parody, a joke, a prank, but it was real, and it was utter madness. The truth was, for the entire time we were together, I'd paid for almost everything myself, every dinner out, every movie, every trip, even his birthday. It was all on me. I bought him the latest iPhone, spending almost $1,500, and in return received a Target gift card for $150. When his father needed treatment and didn't have enough money, I wired $1,800 without a second thought, and now this man I loved was sending me bills for coffee and Uber rides. I closed the email and said out loud, "I won't pay him a cent." A week passed quietly, until one day, in the middle of the workday, my assistant knocked on my office door. Her face was worried, her eyes wide. "Gemma," she said quietly, "some people here want to see you. They have a poster." "A poster?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Before I could get up, the door swung open and Gaspar, his mother, and his father squeezed into the office. Mr. Russo was holding a huge sign covered in large letters. It read, "Gemma owes Gaspar $3,247.82, and below it was the same list of expenses, line after line. Mrs. Russo started screaming, waving her arms. "This woman dated my son for a year. She spent all his money, and now she's not paying him back." People from the neighboring offices began to peer in. Someone came in to see, then someone else. A crowd had gathered in the hallway. Mr. Russo held the sign up and began reading aloud. "Coffee, $14.50. Flowers, $35. Uber ride, $18." Someone in the crowd chuckled quietly, then another, and suddenly the laughter grew louder. "He's asking for money for coffee." I heard someone say, "And for 82 cents, don't forget, another added. The laughter became infectious, and someone clapped. Mrs. Russo's face grew redder, her eyes darting around, hissing, "Stop laughing. This is serious. She owes my son money." But no one was taking her words seriously anymore, and I stood in the center of the room, among my colleagues, and for the first time in a long time, I felt neither pain nor shame, but something akin to liberation. I stood up and, trying to keep my hands from shaking, walked to my desk. I felt dozens of eyes on me, some watching from the doorway, some from behind their monitors, but I didn't care. I opened the drawer, took out my checkbook, slowly, almost deliberately, wrote out a check for $3,500, and, walking up to Gasper, threw it at him, as if I wanted to break the invisible thread that still connected us. "Here's your money," I said, feeling a wave of strength rise within me that I'd never known existed before. "Now pay me back what you owe me." He blinked, confused, as if he didn't immediately understand what I was talking about. "What?" he asked quietly. I answered coldly, emotionlessly, measuring each word precisely, like figures in an account book. "The iPhone I bought you for $1,400, your father's medical bills, which I paid, $1,800, that's $3,200 certified checks, give it back to me." Gasper opened his mouth, then closed it, but said nothing. He looked confused, like a child caught in a lie. Mrs. Russo, enraged, suddenly rushed toward me, shouting something incoherent, but before she could get any closer, my mother appeared in front of me. I didn't even notice her entrance. She seemed to appear out of thin air, strong, confident, and filled with a calm fury. "Security," she shouted. "Get those three out of the office immediately." A second later, 2 security guards entered the office, tall, silent, with an expression of unwavering determination on their faces. They grabbed Mr. Russo and Gasper, while Mrs. Russo continued to scream and struggle as they dragged her toward the elevator. The crowd of employees standing in the hallway burst into applause as the doors closed behind them. The air was filled with the scent of cheap perfume, anger, and shame, but as it turned out, that wasn't the end. Gasper didn't stop. A few days later, he started creating fake social media accounts, posting all sorts of nasty things about me. He'd take my photos, edit them, distort my face, and add captions that made me look like a monster. He'd post videos with comments about how I'd allegedly used him, played with his emotions, and broken his heart. Emails arrived daily, long, rambling, full of self-pity and blame. He'd write that he didn't know what he'd do if I didn't come back, that I'd ruined his life, that he couldn't live without me. My parents couldn't stand it for long. They saw me turn pale, lose sleep, and glance nervously around in the street, as if someone was watching me. Then Dad said it was time to act, and they hired a lawyer, a stern, confident man who, within a week, secured a restraining order, keeping him from coming within 100 feet of me and from contacting me in any way. When I received a copy of the order, I felt calm for the first time in a long time. After that, everything really calmed down. I focused on work and resumed my normal life. I threw myself into projects, worked late, went to meetings, spoke at conferences. I loved feeling needed, focused, at the center of things. A few months passed, and one day I was invited to speak at a regional business conference. I represented our family company, talked about market trends, the development of local businesses, and the technologies that were helping small businesses survive in the new economy. After I finished my presentation, several executives and investors approached me. They shook my hand, thanked me, asked questions, and for the first time in a long time, I felt pride, unmixed with pain or shame. During the online lunch after the conference, I met David Mitchell, the co-founder of a major tech company, a Stanford graduate, and a member of a prominent Seattle entrepreneurial family. He was completely different from Gasper. David spoke calmly, thoughtfully, and unhurriedly. He didn't try to interrupt, didn't strive to impress, didn't play a role. He simply was. He listened, truly listened, when others spoke, and asked questions not for the sake of politeness, but because he was genuinely interested. After the conference, I received a letter from him, not an email, but a real one, handwritten on thick paper with the subtle scent of ink. In the letter, he thanked me for my presentation and enclosed a book on leadership, saying he thought I'd enjoy it. We started corresponding by email. At first, it was dry and professional, about the industry, business strategies, books we'd read. Then the conversation became softer, warmer, but still respectful. Everything between us was simple, honest, and easy. We met several times for coffee to discuss the market, participated in small business forums together, exchanged notes, and laughed at absurd advertising campaigns. These weren't dates, just two people who genuinely enjoyed talking to each other, and perhaps for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just a shadow of the past with me, but someone I could breathe freely with. One evening, after a business event where I gave a short presentation on local business development, David offered me a ride home. We drove along quiet streets, where leaves swirled lazily in the yellowish light of the streetlights, and the wind rustled as if our conversation was about to begin. When we pulled up outside my house, he turned off the engine but didn't hurry to get out. For a moment, the car was silent, only the gentle breathing and the occasional sounds of the evening city blending together. Then he turned to me and, frowning slightly, as if gathering his thoughts, said, "Gemma, I need to tell you something." His voice was calm, but there was that special sincerity in it that couldn't be faked. "I like you," he said after a pause. "And not because you're smart, successful, or independent. Of course, you have all those qualities, and I can see them, but that's not the point. I like you because when I'm with you, life feels meaningful, real. With you, I want to breathe deeper, move on, be better." Does that make sense? I looked at him. In the streetlight, his face seemed especially soft and open, and I suddenly felt the ice melt deep within me, the ice that had seemed to have frozen my heart after all these months. No trace of manipulation, no attempt to impress, only the truth, so simple it took my breath away. "Yes," I said quietly but confidently, "that makes sense, and I'd like to try to build something with you, too." He smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile for real, not the reserved, professional smile he used at business meetings, but a deep, warm, human smile, and his face immediately changed. It became brighter, warmer, as if he himself hadn't expected to hear those very words. After that night, David and I began dating for real. Everything developed naturally, without haste, without the promises made in the heat of passion and then forgotten. A few weeks later, he invited me to Seattle to meet his parents. Their house stood on a hill overlooking the bay, spacious, bright, with the scent of wood and coffee, as if the very air was filled with tranquility. When we arrived, his mother opened the door, an elegant woman with a gentle smile and clear eyes. She hugged David, then turned to me and said, "You must be Gemma. David has told me so much about you. Please come in." There was no curiosity or arrogance in her voice, only genuine warmth. David's father, a tall man with silver hair and an attentive gaze, was waiting for us in the living room. When we entered, he stood, shook my hand, and said, "It's very nice to meet you, Gemma. We've been looking forward to meeting you for a long time." Dinner was surprisingly easy. They asked me about my work, the family company, my interests, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly listened to, that they didn't need any proof, that I was worthy simply because I existed. There was no rudeness, no hidden judgment, no feeling of being judged in a hidden family exam. Everything was homely and simple: laughter, stories, the smell of freshly baked goods, the warm glow of the lamp. After dinner, David's parents suggested coffee in the garden, and as we sat at the round table under a blanket, the conversation somehow naturally turned to future plans, travel, children, and life. The following week, David suggested arranging a get-together for our parents to meet. That evening, when we gathered at my house, everything went surprisingly harmoniously. David's father and my father immediately hit it off. They talked about business, cities, the changes that time brings, and laughed as if they'd known each other for years. At one point, David's father turned to mine and said, "Your daughter is wonderful. She's smart, well-balanced, and, most importantly, she knows what she wants. We're so glad David met her." My father smiled and nodded. "David is a good man. We can see that." A few more weeks passed, and a photo appeared online, a simple, business-like one, taken during an event. We were standing next to David, talking to investors. Nothing romantic, just work, but we shared a look in our eyes, confident, calm, and apparently that was enough. I don't know how exactly Gasper found out, but he did. I was leaving the office that day when I noticed him. He was standing at the entrance, as if waiting. My heart immediately sank. "So, you've advanced quite quickly," he said, blocking my path. "From the moment you broke up with me, you're suddenly in the arms of someone else." "Gasper," I said evenly, there's a restraining order, you're not allowed here. He approached, his eyes blazing with anger. You were with him when you were still with me? Is that why you ended things? I ended things because you and your family are terrible people, I replied, stepping aside. Now, please, step away. He chuckled, almost whispering, you think you're better than me? And suddenly a voice rang out nearby, calm but firm. Like steel under velvet, get away from her. I turned, it was David. I hadn't even noticed him approach. There was no anger in his gaze, only determination, confidence, and a strength that made Gasper freeze in place. Gasper looked at David, then back at me, a flicker of something helpless, irritated, yet wounded, flashed in his eyes, as if he couldn't believe it was really over and that now standing before him wasn't the naive girl he'd grown accustomed to manipulating, but a woman determined never to let herself be humiliated again. Is this your new boyfriend? He asked with a bitter smile, as if trying to offend, but his voice was already hesitant. David calmly, without a hint of irritation, stepped closer and said evenly, if you take one more step toward her, I'll punch you in the face. There was no threat in those words, only the pure confidence of a man accustomed to defending, not attacking. Gasper stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to discern how serious he sounded, and at some point something changed in his expression. His gaze dimmed, his shoulders slumped slightly, as if he'd suddenly realized he'd lost completely. Without a word, he turned away and walked away, slowly, with the humiliated look of someone who's realized for the first time that they've lost their power over someone forever. I watched him go, and inside me there was only one feeling, relief, light and pure, like the first breath after holding it for so long. That was the last time Gasper appeared in my life. Several weeks passed. My mother and I decided to take a walk along the path by Lake Dillon, a place where, as a child, I'd collected pebbles by the water, built towers with them, and believed that if you tossed the most beautiful stone into the lake and made a wish, it would definitely come true. The day was clear, the sun filtered through the pine trees, and everything around seemed especially quiet, as if the lake itself were listening to our conversation. We walked in silence, only our footsteps softly crunching on the sandy path. Then I said, Mom, I used to think that I needed someone to love me for my life to have meaning. She looked at me with a slight smile and asked, and now? Now I understand that the most important thing is to learn to love yourself, I replied, looking at the sun's reflection in the water, and that's enough. Mom squeezed my hand, her fingers warm and confident. You see, she said quietly, I always knew you'd come to this on your own. 6 months after that day, David and I got engaged. We scheduled the wedding for the spring, light, sunny, and hopeful. Everything seemed so right, so peaceful, as if life had finally fallen into place. But, as often happens, the past decided to catch up. A few weeks before the wedding, Mrs. Russo posted a long, wordy message on social media, full of dramatic phrases and twisted accusations. She wrote that I had taken advantage of her son, that I had mercilessly broken his heart, that I was a cold, calculating woman who had ruined a good guy's life. She portrayed herself and her family as victims who had been unfairly wronged. Some people who didn't know the whole story actually believed it. I saw this post spread, some shared it out of sympathy, others out of curiosity, and comments appeared underneath calling me a terrible woman. I remained silent for a long time. For months, I avoided talking about everything that had happened, but reading all this, I realized I couldn't let the lies go unanswered any longer. That evening, sitting at my laptop, I opened a blank window and began writing my post. I told everything, without exaggeration, but also without omissions. I wrote how I once mistook Gasper's stinginess for practicality, how I thought his silence was a sign of depth, not indifference. I confessed how I had endured insults from his family for so long because I believed everything would change after the wedding. I told how I bought my own engagement ring because he said he couldn't afford such an extravagance, how his parents wanted to take the house my parents gave me and move their entire family in without even asking my consent. I described the day Mr. Russo declared that a woman should be beaten to learn obedience, and how Gasper, my then fiancé, not only didn't object, but nodded in agreement. I recalled that humiliating moment in my office when they showed up with a sign demanding money for coffee and Uber rides, portraying me as a debtor in front of my colleagues, and I described how Gasper harassed me for months until I had to seek a restraining order against him. I ended my post with the words, to the Russo family, I will never be your daughter-in-law. I was not a person to you, but a resource, a home, a wallet, a convenience, but you will never have me or my respect." I clicked publish and closed my laptop. Within hours, the story had spread across social media. People shared it, commented, and wrote words of support. The post was seen by Gasper's friends, his colleagues, everyone who had ever known his family. A week later, I learned from mutual acquaintances that Gasper had been fired from his job, and his parents had become the subject of gossip in their small town. Their reputation was ruined. He sent out resumes, but no one responded. I wasn't happy, and I wasn't sorry. I simply felt, for the first time in a long time, that justice does exist, and sometimes it comes quietly, without loud words, but inevitably. That spring, David and I got married, and that day, bathed in soft light and the scent of jasmine, seemed almost surreal, as if fate itself had decided to grant us a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. The ceremony was modest, but it contained everything: the warmth of loved ones, the kind glances, the music that seemed to echo our hearts, and the smiles of people who were genuinely happy for us. David's parents welcomed me with such warmth that I felt less like a guest than a long-lost daughter returning home. My parents, seeing the light in my eyes, seemed to blossom themselves. Their gazes held approval and quiet pride that their daughter had finally found her place and a person with whom she didn't have to pretend. We moved into the very house my parents had once given me, the house that had marked the beginning of the end for Gaspard, and now, against all odds, had become the beginning of something real and kind. I remember David and I repainting the bedroom walls together, scrubbing away the shadows of the past, getting rid of every reminder of someone else's rudeness and intrusion. We even joked about washing away the Rousseau curse with a fresh coat of paint. We threw out the old, stained and torn blanket on which Mrs. Rousseau had once lain in her dirty boots, and replaced the nightstand that Mr. Rousseau had burned with a cigarette, as if leaving his ugly mark. With each change, the house became more and more ours, cozy, vibrant, secure. The first year of marriage to David was exactly what I once dreamed of in a real relationship: no games, no pretense, no fighting for the right to be heard. We were partners in the truest sense of the word. We made decisions together, discussed everything, from business plans to what color to choose for the new living room. We supported each other in everything, sharing our worries, our fatigue, and our joy. David never demanded that I cook or clean, as if it were my birthright. Everything was resolved naturally and calmly. Whoever had more time did the work. If I was working late, he would cook dinner himself, with such inspiration that the kitchen would fill with the aroma of fresh herbs and laughter. When he was swamped with projects, I would take on the housework, and it wasn't hard because there was a sense of reciprocity and respect in these small things. David's parents didn't visit us often, but each time they did, it was filled with warmth and care. They never interfered, didn't give advice without asking, didn't try to teach us life lessons. They were simply there, with kindness and respect. They treated me like a daughter, not like a wallet or a tool, but like a person they truly valued. My parents, in turn, adored David. My father often invited him to play golf, and watching from a distance, I saw a genuine rapport blossom between them. My mother would call David just to chat, to share small details, as if he'd been part of our family from the very beginning, and he truly was. Work was also going great. After my successful presentation at a business conference, I received several offers from large companies, but I stayed in the family business. I loved being close to my parents and seeing our business grow. I was promoted to vice president, and I focused on expanding the company into new markets, feeling that everything I'd once strived for was finally beginning to take shape. David's company was also growing rapidly, and in the evenings, over dinner, we often discussed ideas, exchanged thoughts, and inspired each other. He respected my intelligence, and I respected his judgment and intuition. It was a partnership in which each of us could be ourselves. About a year after our wedding, I met a woman at an event, and during the conversation it turned out she knew Gasper. Hearing his name, I winced internally, but not painfully, just with mild surprise. She told me he'd returned to West Virginia and was living with his parents, and that after the whole story and scandal, he hadn't been able to find a job in Denver. I listened silently. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't feel any schadenfreude either. Everything that had happened to him was the result of his own decisions, his own choices. He'd chosen lies, manipulation, humiliation, and now he was reaping their fruits. This woman also mentioned that Gasper's brother, Luigi, had gotten divorced. His wife, Beatty, finally tired of the endless family drama, simply left, packed her bags, and never looked back. I wasn't surprised. People living in a world of resentment and blame rarely retain someone capable of seeing the light. Sometimes, my thoughts involuntarily returned to that day in the house when everything finally fell apart. I remembered every detail. Mrs. Russo sprawled on the bed in dirty shoes, Mr. Russo with a cigarette burning the furniture, Gasper, who grabbed my wrist the first time I dared to object, and every time, I felt gratitude to fate that everything happened exactly as it did. Before I had time to tie my life to this family, gratitude to my father, who stood up for me then and kicked them out of the house, gratitude to myself, for finding the strength to leave, call off the wedding, and choose myself. If I had married Gasper back then, blinded by the fear of being alone, I would now know for sure that my life would have turned into an endless series of humiliations, resentments, and tears. I would have been a prisoner in a house where rudeness and contempt reigned, where every word was perceived as a challenge, and my every action was condemned. I pictured it vividly, long evenings at the kitchen table with unpaid bills piled on it, looks full of irritation, and his voice, filled with the cold confidence of a man accustomed to considering a woman his property. I would have had to pay for everything, both literally and figuratively, for dinner, for the house, for his silent patience, for his angry outbursts. I would have been treated like something superfluous, a burden, a shadow. I would have shared my life with a man who truly believed that women should be broken into submission. But fate decreed otherwise. I married David, a man who was not a drop of cruelty, but a sea of respect and gentleness. He never tried to change me, never demanded concessions, never restricted my freedom. He saw me not as an adornment, not as an appendage to his life, but as an equal partner. His family welcomed me from the very first moment, with a warmth that immediately relieves tension and makes you feel at home. Their home was filled with laughter, not reproaches, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to be part of a family where you are respected simply for being who you are. 2 years had passed since our wedding. We were sitting over breakfast on a sunny Saturday morning when David suddenly put down his coffee and, leaning slightly toward me, said, "I've been thinking about something, Gemma." "What is it this time?" I smiled, expecting to hear something along the lines of a new business idea or yet another project. "I want to start a foundation," he said, his voice filled with confidence, "a foundation that will help young women in business. Mentoring, scholarships, support programs, meetings with investors. I think it's important. What do you think?" I looked at him, feeling that quiet admiration well up inside me that I experienced every time he mentioned something beyond his personal interests. I replied, that it's a wonderful idea, and I want to be a part of it." The next months were filled with endless meetings, emails, and negotiations. We found like-minded people, reached agreements with several large companies, devised internship programs, and 6 months later, the foundation was up and running. I joined the board of directors, and soon dozens of young women surrounded me, smart, ambitious, yet still unsure, as if standing on the threshold of something great. Looking at them, I saw my old self, the one who once doubted, feared making mistakes, believed the words of the wrong people. I helped them build their careers, taught them not to sacrifice themselves for the sake of others' expectations and not let anyone else decide their worth. One day, one of them, very young, timidly asked, "Gemma, how did you know your husband was the one?" I thought for a moment, smiled, and replied, "Because he never tried to make me smaller. He didn't demand that I give up my goals for him. He didn't see me as a convenience. He saw me as a person, and most importantly, his family treated me with respect from day one. That's no less important than the person you're marrying." 3 years after our wedding, David and I bought a house at the foot of the mountains, a quiet place where the air smelled of pine and a silvery fog lay over the valley in the mornings. We skied there in the winter, hiked there in the summer, sat by the fire, drank tea from metal mugs, and talked about everything and nothing. It became our refuge from the city noise, a place where the world shrank to the size of two people who understood each other without words. Meanwhile, life went on as usual. My parents were aging, the company was growing, and I took on more and more responsibilities. David was always there. He didn't get upset when I worked late, didn't demand attention when I was tired. He simply cooked dinner, brought tea, and said, "You'll have time to rest later." the most important thing now is that you're doing what you love. Sometimes, in rare moments of silence, I thought of Gasper, but less and less often. These memories no longer hurt. They became part of a lesson, a reminder that love without respect is just an illusion, and a family without kindness is a prison. Now I knew, real life begins not when someone loves you, but when you learn to love yourself and not let anyone deprive you of that feeling. The house, which had once been the cause of pain and arguments, became a symbol of all the good things that had happened to me. Here, David and I built our true home, with warmth, laughter, the aroma of fresh coffee in the morning. Here, we hosted dinners for friends, laughed until we cried, dreamed of the future. Sometimes, I would go into the master bedroom and remember the day everything changed. Mrs. Russo sprawled on the bed in her dirty shoes, Mr. Russo smoking a cigarette, and Gasper squeezing my wrist, and I would smile, because now I knew, she hadn't gotten what she wanted. This house was mine, my marriage was mine, my life was mine, and I had never been happier.